Picture this. You are in a cost of living crisis that is driving costs up. And it's not just your country. This is happening around the world. But different things, different problems, different countries. But for the UK in particular, it really does come down to Brexit. And in a case where we are looking at rising food prices, you would think this would be the point where the government would turn to farmers and go, okay, guys, what do you need? We need more British food on the shelves. We've seen throughout the pandemic the problems that long supply chains can particularly cause, and the problems they can have when they get disrupted. So let's get more British food on the British people's plate. You would think that would be the attitude the government would take. But as we've said before, this government is not interested in serious long-term strategic planning, because that's what it is seriously going to take to get out of some of these messes that they have, governed themselves into. They are obsessed with firefighting and fighting any current fire that just happens to be the problem, while potentially another fire is literally starting behind the back. So they're fighting one fire and then they go, glad that's out. Oh, better put this one out. And while that one smolders and probably even reheats, there's another one, they have to put down just a week or two more later. You can't run a government like this forever. And this is where we are at. A government that is incapable of doing stuff, which causes more and more problems. Even farmers are going, look, you are crippling our food sector. You are not helping it. You are hindering it through policies you have chosen to do. They ain't got nothing to do with the EU. They ain't got nothing to do with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, even though that is, some factor in it. But there is a ton of stuff that the government controls that it is causing problems and mounting, on the UK food sector. On a sector that is already facing huge problems. So today we're going to go over to Farmers Weekly to find out what the farmers have been thinking about all this. So before we go jumping into that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go, over to the Farmers Weekly, with the title of Government Labour Policy Crippling Food Sector, says farm leaders. The food and farming industry leaders have blasted the government's post-Brexit farm labour policy, which they claim is adding to the cost of living crisis by failing to ensure food security. The public evidence session of the UK Trade and Businesses Commission on Thursday focused on the cost of living crisis, food inflation, and the UK government's new national food strategy. James Withers, the chief executive of Food and Drink Scotland, said Brexit had triggered a weaker pound, extra costs for businesses, labour market shortages, and new red tape, saying that Brexit has made absolutely nothing better. It's made things worse, he added. Mr. Withers said the labour market had been in turmoil in Scotland, and finding a way of, quote, unlocking the Home Office for sensible conversation was vital. But industry leaders cannot get in the door to even raise concerns about the genuine gaps that many sectors are facing. The NUF head of food and farming, Phil Hamburg, slammed the UK government for its strangling labour policy and limiting capacity, citing this as the single biggest issue impacting horticulture, saying, "The way we have treated the labour policy since coming out of the EU has been absolutely crippling for the entire food industry," he said. The biggest single factor in reducing growth in horticulture is access to people and labour. The ability for the industry not only to weather the storm like the one we see now, but also to grow in the future is predicated on having a labour policy that meets its needs. And of course, well, we know how, shall we say, Priti Patel certainly feels about opening up these particular labour markets. It ain't going to happen. Witnesses have also cited how Brexit has exacerbated these issues and had a knock-on effect on the cost of living crisis, citing the weaker pound and the tsunami of red tape contributing factors. What were we saying since the very beginning of 2016? Going on, well, not only since 2016, but since then. The UK has problems, but these problems were never caused by us being in the European Union or caused by the EU. They were caused by the UK government and were very particular problems to the UK, which they needed to solve. But for whatever reason, they just didn't really seem to care for whatever reason about it and just used to blame the EU as a good old scapegoat. But of course, one thing we're saying is, look, when we leave, all these problems you're saying Brexit is going to solve, it is not, because we go, okay, you do Brexit, but there's this problem that Brexit is going to cause. How do you intend to cause that problem? The response was, oh, Project Fear. Of course, we never got any sensible answers to any of the problems that Brexit would cause, and now we are seeing those problems, and of course, there are no solutions to these problems. Anyway, it continues. The government announced on 13th of June that over 10,000 additional seasonal worker visas will be issued, and for the remainder of 2020, of which 2,000 will be allocated to the poultry sector. This means a total of 40,000 visas will be made available for seasonal workers in 2022 for the seasonal worker pilot. But the NUF said that a minimum 6-week lead time is needed for labour providers to recruit the additional temporary workers. Therefore, an August arrival at the earliest possible time poses a risk and leaves the soft fruit and top fruit sector facing a shortage of staff. Gough McInerney, the UK Trade and Business Commissioner and the Director for Corporate Affairs and Sustainability of the Director for the British Association of Farmers, said the government's failure to address these post-Brexit challenges to the immigration and to the labour market is having a knock-on effect, not just for the current cost of living crisis, but also for our long-term food security. Ministers must meet with the industry leaders and urgently agree to the long-term plan which will prevent acute workforce shortages before they happen, rather than the current restrictive sticking plaster strategy. And of course, this is what the response has been from George Eustice. Speaking at the Royal Highland Show, the Deputy Secretary George Eustice admitted that the Ukraine war had stifled efforts to recruit temporary labour on farms. But remember, how is there? That's just one country. There is the entire European Union you could offer visas to. But of course, that's not part of the Conservative plan. We can't just suddenly bang on for years saying how awful these European workers are, and then suddenly turn around and say, okay, guys, we actually need you to help run some of our key industries and help to, run our economy, and of course, take tax from them as well. Of course, this is very, very much the problem where you have had a resistance to people not talking or at least willing to tell the truth about immigrants. But anyway, we continue. He insisted that the labour farm shortages were impacting countries across the world, not just the UK. Mr. Eustace said that Ukrainian workers made up about 70% of temporary visas coming under the visa scheme last year, but had decided to stay at home, in some cases to fight against Russia. The main labour providers had to widen their search for self and source workers from other countries, excluding Russia. So, again, what's wrong with reaching out to some of these European countries where we used to get them from? Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Of course, as we always said, this would make us very, very unattractive. And the thing is, most of these people They would come over for the summer work and then they would go. You know? But of course, what obviously ends up happening with immigration, they come over a couple of times and then they end up staying. Boston is a perfect example of what was used to be a very small village expanding because of the European labourers. They got to the point of, well, I've been here 4 5 years on the trot now. Why bother going home when I can just stay, do something else during the winter? And then, of course, they have families, etc., etc. They add to the local economy, and Boston grew because of that. You actually notice, in fact, it would be very interesting to look up in the recent census. Probably the how growth has probably just fallen off a cliff edge. Of certainly the population of Boston. That'd be something very interesting to look up. I'd be interested to see if that what happened there. But as always, yeah, it doesn't look like the farming sector is going to get any help anytime soon, especially from this government, because obviously it involves opening up visas to immigrants. And what does this current government not like? Immigrants. And of course, we've explained multiple times why it is very hard to get quote unquote local workers to these places. Look, these farms are in very rural places. You can't very often just hop on a bus. As we've said before, in South Yorkshire alone, the shocking statistic is that at least 1 in 5 workers will turn down a job because they cannot physically get to the work location. So, and of course, that is just a lot of jobs. That's not talking just agricultural jobs. So, there's bigger, wider problems at play. So, of course, you need a again immigrant labor to help with these shortages. But of course, that's yeah, that would be a topic for sensible discussion. But of course, our government ain't interested in any sensible discussion. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, there is the YouTube thank you button down below. And of course, the YouTube subscription button, where you get all sorts of little bells, whistles, and badges and whatnot when you subscribe to that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.